Good afternoon, everyone. Really good to see you all here this afternoon. My name is Jon Vrushi. I'm a research and policy coordinator at the Transparency International Secretariat in Berlin. And it's my distinct pleasure to host this and moderate this panel with a stellar cast of speakers. I've been told, I don't watch football, but I've been told that we're competing for attention with the France-England game or something like that. UK? I think it's England.
Oh, England. Okay.
It's England. In football, they're divided, as with nothing else. As with nothing else. But, so yeah, I've been told that that we're competing for attention with the game. However, as I said, I don't watch football, so I don't really know much about the Qatar World Cup, unfortunately. I do know something that happened in relation to Qatar recently is that the Vice President of the European Parliament was actually detained along with a few other high-level politicians at the European Parliament level in connection to gifts and illicit lobbying conducted on behalf of Qatar and Morocco, which I understand is another country I should congratulate for winning something today. So I'm sure a lot of you will enjoy the World Cup references that I've been just told to make. But essentially what matters is that this is why we need to have this session. This is why we need to talk about availability of data for political integrity, data for anti-corruption. When we talk about data for anti-corruption, we mean things like political finance registers, asset and interest disclosure of politicians, lobbying data. And it's only if we have all of these data sets with the relevant information and connected well between themselves that we can start to connect the dots, that we can see what gifts our politicians are receiving, from whom. You know, this article from Politico called it non-traditional methods of lobbying because the police found 600,000 euros in cash stashed, and cell phones and other things that they confiscated. So it's important to have all of this information captured. It's important to have it in high quality data sets that we can connect and that we can develop red flagging tools and risk warnings and so on. And I think, especially increasingly with the transnational nature of corruption, it's important that not only do we have these data sets good and in good quality at the national level, but that we also have them interoperable between countries. We were just in Warsaw a month ago with 20-something Transparency International chapters, and one very interesting idea was discussed of not just having lobbying registers, but having lobbying registers with a unique identifier that can be connected across Europe, so that, you know, for example, a foreign agent uses a lobbying firm which arranges for a donation to be made to a political party via a shell company, you know, owned by another company based abroad. This thing is more common than not these days. So what we want to do today is, first of all, get an excellent introduction of a new powerful tool and benchmark, which is the Global Data Barometer, and I will give the floor to Silvana in a moment. And it'd be, you know, I'd be very happy if one of the outcomes of this session is that we come out of today knowing more about this amazing tool, about this powerful benchmarking tool, and that you can all look into it and start incorporating it into your work. Then secondly, we'll get a great global overview of data availability, data governance, and some gaps, especially in 3 key anti-corruption and political integrity indicators. And we'll hear from OGP on that. And after having received this sort of global overview, then we will dive deep into specific cases. We'll hear from our chapter colleagues, and hopefully from the audience as well, about challenges, but also more importantly about successes and strategies to advance data for political integrity and anti-corruption. So I'll stop talking, but before I do that, I will introduce the great panelists that we have today. I'll start with Silvana Fumega, holds a PhD from the University of Tasmania in Australia. She holds a BA in political science from the University of Buenos Aires and has a master's in public policy from Victoria University of Wellington. There's a lot of policy in all of your things there. She served as a consultant for numerous international organizations, governments, and civil society groups. And in recent years, she has focused her work on the intersection between data and inclusion, as well as measurement tools. She currently acts as a director of the Global Data Barometer, and we'll hear the presentation from her. So, Silvana,
thank you so
take
much.
it away.
I'm not sure where's the thing. Oh, yeah. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, I mean, going back to the World Cup reference, the only time that I wasn't here at the IACC was for a very good reason. It was the match yesterday where Argentina won. It was a really stressful match, but that was the only time that I wasn't here in any panel. And going back to some of the topics you were mentioning about lobbying and interoperability, I'm not going to go into the details of the results, but I have to say that those are the key ones that are not performing very well in the results. So there's a lot of work to be done there. But again, I'm going to just provide a brief introduction on what we did with the GDP, and I'm going to let Renzo explain some of the results that they found with the data that we were releasing in May 2022. So basically, I mean, this is the second time that we were here talking about the Global Data Barometer, because the first time was 3 years ago in a small workshop where we were discussing about the idea of doing a new benchmark, thinking about not only just data sets that are published, but also thinking about a more complex data ecosystem that we are dealing with these days. So after 3 years of that workshop and almost a decade after the release of the Open Data Barometer, that is our predecessor study, we are here talking about the results of the first edition of the Global Data Barometer. Basically, I mean, in a nutshell, the goal of the barometer is to provide a new benchmark and the key data needed to better understand the state of data for public good around the world. And in that sense, I mean, we know that public good is a contested concept. There are many different visions on how society should be organized. But what we did in the barometer is to take the Sustainable Development Goals as a point of reference for identifying some set of particular topics related to public goods, and that we can provide a global assessment against. For example, we are talking about health for all, climate action, strong and just institutions, just to name a few. Taking all these concepts into account, the GDB draws on primary data coming from a global expert survey. The survey was carried out in mid-2021 in 109 countries and has been combined with secondary data from other sources to generate a range of metrics. The period that we cover, and I think this is important to mention, is May 2019 to May 2021. And the idea is to look at the data landscape beyond open data and through a series of thematic lenses, such as land, political integrity, climate action, health, public contracting, company information, and public finance. Forgot to. Oh, there. So what I wanted to do is to provide just a few numbers of this first edition. What you're going to find there, apart from those numbers, are some points regarding, for example, particular features of data governance rules, stakeholders targeted by capacity building interventions, particular properties of published data sets, and examples of data use and impacts. As you see there, some of the numbers that we covered in this first edition were 109 countries with the assistance of 12 regional hubs, 6 thematic partners, 39 indicators, and more than 60,000 data points. Also, if you go into the website and the report, you're going to find information on more than 1,100 data sets, more than 900 frameworks, and more than 70 open data initiatives. I want to clarify that all the data, methodology, and other information you're going to find in the website, and also a feedback channel for you to share with us your comments and your points regarding this edition. Just very briefly, I know that the picture is not the best, but just to provide you an idea of how it is structured. The GDP is divided in 4 pillars that are data governance, capabilities, availability, and the use of impact of data for public good. The 39 indicators that I already mentioned are fitting these 4 pillars via 2 core modules that are data governance and capability within a particular country, and 7 thematic modules. 5 of these 7 thematic modules revolve around money, accountability, and power. I think it's very key for our conversation. And we developed them with the partnership of expert organizations. We have here 2 of them. I mean, the political integrity module was developed in partnership with OGP and Transparency International, public procurement in partnership with Open Contracting, company information in partnership with Open Ownership, public finance in partnership with GIFT, the Global Initiative for Fiscal Transparency, and land in partnership with Land Portal. We also have 2 other modules that are related to pressing issues today, that are climate action and health and COVID. In order to gather all this data that we have there in our website, the regional partners hired national researchers. They were trained according to the methodology, and after the field work, what they did, I mean, with the help of the coordinator and also the expert opinion of the thematic partners, was to review the data in the second half of 2021. Just to start finishing, because I know I don't have too much time, I want to show you some of the indicators about the political integrity module, because I think it's the one that is really important here, and I know that Renzo is going to cover some results of those modules. Those are some of the indicators that are included there. We have political finance, we have asset declarations, we have lobbying, as I mentioned before, is one of the indicators that are not performing really well in any of the regions. We have public consultations, RTI performance, public integrity interoperability, the other one that I was mentioning before, and uses of this data. And I want to mention some other indicators that are coming from other modules, but that are pretty related to the political integrity concept that we are discussing here today. So we have procurement data, beneficial ownership, land tenure. So those are some of the indicators that are also included in the OGP report that Renzo is going to be covering in a few minutes. Basically, what I want to do is to finish just, again, the picture probably is not the best, but just to show you there some of the things that you can find in the website. If you go to results, open data tab, there you can download all the data by region, by country, by module, and do whatever you want with the data that is included there. Or in the landing page, you can go and search for your country, for your region, or the module that you care about. And if you go to the Global Data Barometer report, you can find there our own findings in 3 different languages. So that's some of the ideas or some of the inputs that you have for you to do your own analysis and your own tools. There is the website, and I'm going to leave it there because basically I'm not going to go into the findings because our partner OGP has done a great report on some of the main findings around political integrity module, and because we want to encourage and support the uses. I think one of the things, as Jon was mentioning, one of the things that we want to leave this conversation with is new uses and new results and new analysis coming from these conversations. That's what we want to support. So in that sense, apart from going to the website and checking the results and using the data, please keep an eye on our social media accounts because we are going to keep supporting uses and new analysis during the first half of 2023. So basically, I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to invite everybody to check the website and to write to us with ideas, results, and comments to improve future editions. So thank you, Jon.
Thanks a lot, Silvana. If you could just press the next slide. Silvana, thank you so much. And let me just say what a pleasure it's been to cooperate together, especially from TI side, to be with OGP and with Global Data Barometer in this exercise. If you want to change anything, you first need to measure it, and this has been, a really, really important benchmarking process. So truly thank you to you, your team, and all the national researchers who have produced all of these hundreds of thousands of data points. It's truly an unprecedented exercise. So thank you for that. Next, I have the pleasure of introducing my colleague, Renzo. He's a senior research and data officer at the OGP. He is the author and co-author of several reports. including the OGP Vital Signs, 10 Years of Data in Review, and OGP's first ever global report, Democracy Beyond the Ballot Box. Renzo, could you tell us, from the analysis that you've done, some of the key findings, especially on some political integrity indicators? What's the state of play in terms of data availability and governance in the OGP countries?
Thanks, John, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Congratulations. You've made it this far to IACC, and it's getting good. So I'm so glad to be here because the Global Data Barometer is such an excellent resource, and I'm about to show you why. We have gone in there. We went into the massive data set, all of these data points, and there is just so much information, so much rich information that we can use for analysis, for advocacy. And so I wanted to share some of the findings of our report on this topic, which is called Broken Links. You can probably guess why it's called Broken Links, and I'll get into the specifics. So what did we look at? We looked specifically at 8 policy areas covered by the Global Data Barometer around issues of political corruption. So this includes asset disclosure, land ownership, beneficial ownership, several of the areas that Silvana mentioned. But for today, for this session, I want to focus on 3 of these topics, specifically asset disclosure, political finance, and lobbying. So responding to John's question, what is the state of open data in these areas? So the Global Data Barometer covers several elements of open data, not just whether it exists, but also the legal frameworks around the data sets. So we'll start there. How many countries require data collection in these areas? Looks pretty good, right? This is an analysis of OGP countries, so almost 70 OGP countries included in the Global Data Barometer data sets. We find that all OGP countries require some form of collection of asset disclosure. This is not surprising because it's one of the eligibility criteria for joining OGP. Nearly all of them require some form of collection of data on political finance, the money that is going into political parties and candidates. Far fewer require any sort of collection around lobbying. This is whether the data is legally required to be collected. How many do you think actually publish any data? I see people shaking their heads. I'll show that next. So the numbers become a little lower. This is whether any data is available online. So one of the great things about the Global Data Barometer is that it doesn't look just at whether the data exists, but it actually goes deeper to determine whether the data is of high quality. And one of the most important elements that we focused on in our report was whether the data sets included high-value pieces of information. So for each of these topics, we wanted to know, do the data sets actually hold information that can be used for anti-corruption purposes? So to give you an example, for asset disclosures, not just whether there is any sort of asset disclosure available online, but does it actually include changes over time? Does it cover family members, spouses? Does it cover income specifically as well? And there, the picture is a lot worse. So how many countries actually publish this high-value information? We found for lobbying, it's less than 10%. For the other areas, about 1/3 of OGP countries publish this sort of information. Now, you can find all of the specific data points that we looked for, and I'll get to that in a second. But the other format, or the other element of data that the barometer looks at is the format. So is this data usable? Is it actually in open data standards? And is it free? Is it updated? Is it machine readable? And there too, we see a lot of challenges. So even where countries have the data available in some form, even when they include some of these elements, these details, the data is often in the form of scanned PDFs, sometimes image files, hard to analyze, takes a lot of time to get through because you can't download it all in bulk. And you all know this, but it's something that we can now put as a global survey that is recent and actionable to determine these findings at the level of individual countries. So overall, what are the key takeaways? Again, our report looked at more than just these 3 areas, but we find that the conclusions are similar across the board. First of all, the data is often not even online. This may be because there aren't any legal requirements to collect or publish the data. Sometimes there are, and it's an issue of implementation, but often the data is not online. Sometimes there are broken links when you click through. But even when the data is online, it's often not high quality. And this doesn't include the high value information I mentioned, or sometimes it's hard to use. And as Jon was saying, we find there are very, very few unique identifiers that can link data sets. And this is not across countries. This is even at the level of individual countries. We find very few identifiers. And the last thing I wanted to mention is that we want to see more OGP commitments on these topics. Most OGP countries have not made commitments in the areas that I just mentioned, even though many of them have been participating now for almost a decade. So all of this is available in our new report, Broken Links. The last thing I wanted to mention is that you can find all of this information as well in a tool that we have created called the Data Explorer. And especially for the researchers, the advocates, the data nerds like me, you will love this. So you can go in and actually look at any country and see the findings from the Global Data Barometer on whether they have data available and in which formats. So this is Georgia's asset disclosure, which the data is available online, but we can see which particular details of that data are available online. And in this case, we can see that, for example, it doesn't cover in-kind assets. So we can also compare with other countries, and we can also look at the sources, the justifications from the Global Data Barometer researchers on why this was the case. And if you have been looking for data sets on political integrity, you know that they are scattered. They are scattered across agencies, different government institutions. They are very hard to find for a single country on any of these topics. So the Global Data Barometer has done the work for you. They have collected all of this information on where these data sets exist. It is an open data format. You can use tools like this to locate them easily. And so in this case, you can find the primary data set for asset disclosures in Georgia or in any other of the more than 100 countries that the Global Data Barometer reviewed. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorenzo. Could you go to the slide where you have all the table with all the back. This one, yeah. So yeah, thank you so much, Lorenzo, for that presentation. I think not only do we have great quality data and really comprehensive analysis, but this is also some really amazing analysis that you have done in the OGP based on the GDP data. I think this is some of the most actionable research I've actually seen this year in our area of work, because just by looking at this table, you can see that between, let's say, asset disclosure and political finance, you have 94 and 100% availability. And this creates this fallacy when you talk. I often talk to colleagues and they say, oh, we've got the law on asset disclosure, it's fine. We need to work on other things. Or, oh, we've got the law on political finance, it's fine. We need to work on other things. And then when you say, well, is it actually published online? And they're like, I'm not actually sure. I'll get a colleague to check. And then when the colleague checks, it's not online. Now, if the data is available but not online, what use is it to anyone? Especially most of us work on organizations with, especially at the national level, with, 2, 3, maybe 10 members of staff, you don't have time to send FOIA requests and you know, build this data set yourself. So if it's not published, what uses it to you? But then if it's published online, but it doesn't tell you if the asset value has changed, or if if the spouse has declared or not declared the assets, then again, what uses it to you if it's online, but it doesn't contain these key elements? And then finally, if it's not in open data, if it's not in sort of like machine readable, as we say, like in a way that you can use it and reuse it and reproduce it, and then what uses it to you? So whenever you hear people say, oh, don't worry, we do have the asset disclosure law, you have to ask these following questions. And the GDP and the OGP through the Data Explorer and through the GDP website have made answering that question super easy. Actually, on Monday, we had a great workshop with some of the colleagues here, and we were able to build model commitments that you can, maybe in half an hour, come up with a model commitment which you can then advocate at the OGP. So thank you so much, Renzo. I have a follow-up question. Do you have any concrete examples when having this data has been useful in detecting or exposing a political corruption case?
Sure. Thanks, John. So each data set alone doesn't make much of a difference, right? As we were saying, they need to be linked. And this is, I guess, an example I can mention that comes from, that we feature in our report is the case of the former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš of the Czech Republic. And as many of you may know, he was accused of siphoning funds, subsidies for farms from the EU. The question is how? How did we find out? And the answer is through a network of linked data. In this case, coming from multiple countries across the EU. So to give you the example, there was data from the EU on who was receiving these subsidies that Danish journalists were working on and got through right to information requests. There was also data on beneficial ownership, so who owned the companies that were receiving the subsidies. There was data on land ownership, specifically in France, because Andrej Babiš had bought an estate in France using that money. And together, journalists, activists, and eventually prosecutors at the level of the EU and Czech Republic were able to combine this data, as well as data leaked from the Pandora Papers, to put together this picture of how Andrej Babiš had used a shell of network companies to get the EU get this money from the EU, the subsidies, and then spend it. And this is the power of linked data. And we talk about broken links in our report because it's not just the links that are broken, the 404 when we go onto a website. It's also the links of data and people within countries, across countries that are currently broken. So we need to be able to combine that data like in that case, and they did not have the luxury of unique common identifiers, right? This was incredibly time-consuming and difficult, but it's an example of the type of impact that this data, when put together in combination and collaboration of various actors, it can make a real difference. And so that's one of the examples in the report, which I should mention, actually we have in physical copy in the back of the room, so you can read more about that case. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Renzo. Now, onto the more kind of like country-specific part of the panel. We'll move on to the next speaker, Sandra Martnez. She's a specialist in democracy and electoral regimes and holds an MA in political science and a bachelor's degree in political science. For more than 10 years, she has led actions across civil society to promote transparency, integrity, and accountability in public management and political systems, particularly on political finance and accountability. And since 2020, she has been the program director of political systems and state initiatives in Transparencia for Colombia, which I'm not allowed to have favorite chapters, but it is one of my favorite chapters. So Sandra, can you tell us a little bit, based on this sort of structure, of what are some of the existing challenges in the political integrity data ecosystem in Colombia. So what is there, what is missing, and what do you plan to do? How do you plan to promote more transparency for the missing elements in your country?
Thank you. Thank you, Jon, and good afternoon, everybody. I know it's hard. It's been a long week, so really, we're very thankful to see you all here. If I can go a step behind Jon with that question, and we have been for a whole week discussing about the quality of democracy and how can we strengthen our democratic values to fight against corruption. So for us, it's a direct link between the two of them, no? And although we do have a lot of data and that is really useful and available for all of us, for governments, for civil society organizations, for public policy makers, for lawmakers, I wanted to bring some information kind of to wonder what are we doing with this data and how can we move forward. So you know that recently IDEA International launched this report about quality of democracy, and also for the Latino Barometer, which is an ongoing survey that they do for citizenship in Latin American region. They have been launching periodically some data regarding the quality of democracy and how people perceive this. So since 2020, the number of countries that move, I think this one is not working, right? Hello? Yeah, this is better. Thank you. So since 2020, the number of countries that have moved toward authoritarian governments have been more than the ones moving to democratic governments. So this is one thing that we have to take into account. Second, various of these democratic governments that are starting to get the authoritarian virus were democratically elected. So somehow they had a little legitimacy and credibility. Then one thing that we have been seeing more and more, and they were saying even for Latin America, is the first time in the last 10 years that only less than half, 49% of the citizens are supporting democracy. So what they're saying is, basically, I don't care if it's democracy or not, as long as the state is able to deliver what we need. And what do they need? They need education, employment, health, good access to the basic needs that they have. So somehow they are feeling that democracy is not delivering that. Why did I bring this? Because I know that data by itself won't give us enough tools to do something. So we have to do something with this data in order to change this situation. So regarding the information about Colombia, for example, although political integrity was one of the lowest areas graded for our country, one of the elements that was highly rated was political finance. And this is due to a process that we have to say, well, I might go a little bit ahead of what you wanted to go further with Cuentas Claras, but this is an initiative we have been doing for many years now, working with electoral authority, political party organizations, civil society, lawmakers, in order to advance in something that we think it's a right, that is public access to the information about how campaigns are being financed or how political parties are being financed. And we say, we think it's public because this is in our constitution thoroughly, and then now I'm going to the challenges you mentioned. In the last couple of months, even this has been discussed in Congress, if we should avoid that a specific principle in our constitution and then go backwards regarding if information about political finance should be public or not. So this, I mention it and I bring it here because I think it's one of these big challenges. All this data mainly is created or gathered by formal or government sources, and we kind of give as something that is for sure that this information is going to be available. But funny enough, 10 years later, and we still have to keep on fighting and saying, you know, you can't go backwards. And this is a big alert for all of us, if we relate it with quality of democracy and how low people are really trusting in democracy. So this is something that I think for all of us is very important. Then the second thing that I think it's important is this information only gives us a part of the picture, and for many reasons. One has to do with quality of the information. So, for example, in these data sets, Colombia is highly valued in terms of public procurement reports. But we know for practice and we know for analyzing this information that not all public procurement is reported in these sets. A lot of public procurement in our country goes through other laws and processes, and somehow they are not, it's not mandatory to publish the information in these public sites. It's called SECOP. In terms of the information of political and campaign financing, again, because of all the reports that we have been doing and following this information and journalists and others, we have come to an estimate that only 30% of the money that is flowing through political and electoral processes is the one that is being reported. So what happened to the other 70%? I can guess one thing, and is that is being used to all these authoritarian viruses and all these other things that we know are really harming the electoral processes. And then the other thing that I would like to highlight at this point has to do with the quality of the information. We have been seeing over and over again, and this is a problem I will say about governance on the information, but in terms of who is in charge of uploading the information and how well prepared in terms of technology, in terms of, I don't know, uploading these reports, in terms of downloading Excel programs and putting the information. There's a gap. Perhaps some countries are more advanced in those things. In Colombia, no. We still need like some kind of tools for those that are in charge of uploading that information. Then the other thing is, if we have the technology, how can we work in increasing the quality of this information? And there are single things, but for example, there's a difference when you register a number with commas or with dots, puntos, because the amount is different, really different. So sometimes when we are downloading the information and analyzing, it's like, what is this? And then we see, oh, but the hard thing is, the government goes out and they say public comments about how much money they have invested. This is a real case. In COVID-19, and they were so happy saying, oh, we have invested a lot of money, and we were all like adding information like, this doesn't sound. Of course it didn't sound, because somebody uploaded information wrong, and the government was saying public statements with wrong information. So the thing about the quality of information is also associated with how can we use the technology to maybe avoid some of those mistakes, but also about the governability, about how often do you actualize the information, update information. And then the other thing, as I mentioned, is how or what can we do when things that we are giving as something that you already achieved, for example, that information about public finance is already public and we have the right to know that information, and then government start discussing whether they should have this as a mandatory thing or not. So I will leave it there.
Thanks a lot, Sandra, for this really interesting insights. I think it's really important to ring this alarm bell of not having this or avoiding this teleological approach that things only get better, because they don't always get better. They also get worse. I mean, we're having this conference now just a week after the ECJ ruling, which turned the clocks back on beneficial ownership progress by at least a decade. So we'll return to Cuentas Claras in a bit, but your reminder that even in a country where you made so much progress and you achieved so much success with political finance transparency, that you now fear that you may have some regrets because of what is being discussed in Parliament. That's a very good reminder of us all that, you know, once you achieve success, you still have to fight for it. So thank you very much for that reminder. And next, I have the pleasure to introduce another star of our movement, someone who is also to be congratulated for the next IACC that will be held in Lithuania.
Just as all of us.
he specifically asked me not to congratulate him, so that's why I'm doing that. Sergejus Muravjovas, he's the CEO of Transparency International Lithuania and the founder of TransparencySchool.org, also a previous winner of the Amalia Award. He's a fan of anti-corruption initiatives that led to sustainable and measured change, and is particularly interested in the behavioral approaches to good governance. From 2009 to 2015, he served 2 terms on the TI International Board of Directors, so it's really great to have you with us here on the panel, Sergejus. My question for you is that Lithuania has a relatively healthier sort of anti-corruption data ecosystem than some other countries. But still, what do you see they're missing, and how do you plan to push for this data to be made available?
Right, so good morning. Well, actually, good day, everybody. I had an early morning meeting, just for the record, so it's not that I just got up. But thank you for overly kind introduction, John. It's a good question, and I come from a country that has plentiful of data when it comes to politics, political integrity, and anti-corruption. This is true. For instance, I can share with you such pieces of trivia as that we know for a fact that 2/3 of our MPs, so 100 out of 141, over the span of the previous parliamentary term, had 4,000 meetings with interest groups, with the members of various interest groups. I come from a country where we know that 1,800 people from 200 institutions have had long-term access to the parliament over the same period of time, and had almost 10,000 meetings with various MPs. We know that when it comes to parliamentary committees, they discussed about 900 pieces of legislation over the span of 4 years, about 6,000 times, and with 5,000 various representatives of institutions and interest groups present. So lots of data. The real question is, well, what do you do with this data? Because clearly, you could see that it does give a totally different meaning to a conversation about transparency. And I would argue that data actually is these red blood cells of transparency, right? Because they make that conversation much more meaningful. And this is precisely where I think we are at now in the country of ours. Because I would argue that any meaningful assessment of transparency should be tied and based on the availability of data and data as such. So this is a brief introduction and perhaps a teaser for the questions that you might have later on, because when we go nitty-gritty and go global data barometer, we obviously have some challenges ahead of us. And one main challenge, you just mentioned it, it's this pink elephant in the room. You can choose another color, of course, but it's the beneficial ownership, and it's the data on beneficial ownership. Just as late as August 2022, Lithuania was one of the laggards. When it came to the availability of this data, the situation did change now. We do have the BO registry. That data is public. It's not open, but it should remain public for the foreseeable future from our conversations with the Center of Registers. Clearly, in the light of the ECJ ruling, there will be some rethinking to be done, but that is one main advocacy goal of ours, which overshadows a lot of other issues because, of course, the ECJ ruling in particular permeates the narrative as to what else should be public, what should not be public, what should be open, what should not be open, and people use that analogy to question the need for data as a public interest resource. Now, having said that, when it comes to other issues on our agenda, 2 main ones stand out. And that is the quality of data and the openness of data when we think outside of the BO domain. Because as a matter of fact, we do have quite a bit of various data sets available. It's just that they are of relatively poor quality. And the institutions that are in charge of maintaining and assembling the data often are not aware of the fact that they need to have it of better quality. They often do not know what to make of that data. And that actually is tied very much to our other advocacy goal, and that is to help those institutions that gather data to start using that data to understand how well they actually function and how well they actually attend to public interest. Because again, my argument would be that we live in the world which has to make decisions in real time, has to make decisions based on data, and just as our policies and our advocacy campaigns should be data-driven, not just standards-driven, and we can have that conversation later on because perhaps you do not agree, so should our public sector institutions make sense of the data that they assemble from taxpayers and use that data to help us understand how well they perform according to their key performance indicators, which is a very difficult conversation to be had. Because a lot of those institutions, regardless which level we take, whether it's macro, meso, or micro, are not comfortable with that. They're still analog, they're not digital. And clearly, the fact that law enforcement and monitoring institutions often still are also analog and not digital does not help. And that, I think, is one of the main challenges that we have ahead of us, because I do think that without the clear, good quality data on our hands, it would be very difficult very soon to speak of meaningful baselines that would allow us to understand, are we doing better in terms of transparency? Are we doing better in terms of corruption-related risk management or not? Because the world is moving on. There's an availability of data that we've never seen before. The private sector uses it very much, and I think this is something which we should seriously consider if we are going forward with our work. So perhaps a couple of remarks, a couple of teasers, but this is what we agreed on because I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thanks a lot, Sergej. It's really, really insightful, as always. And thank you for that great soundbite. Data is red blood cells of transparency. I really enjoyed that. I think I'll use it. And thank you also very much for...
Open source.
Open source. And thank you very much for reminding us of the role that we also have as civil society in helping institutions, law enforcement agencies, and so on. I think we will return to that point again in the next round of questions. But before we do that, it's really my pleasure to introduce the last member of the panel, who is a long-standing member of Transparency International. I've had the pleasure of just meeting him during this conference. Tur-Od Lkhagvajav, he's the co-founder and president of Transparency International Mongolia. But particularly important is that he's one of the bridges between Transparency International and OGP, between anti-corruption and the open government world, as the envoy for the open government partnership, with over 25 years of professional experience in public, private sectors, and in the civil society and international organizations. Tur-Od, thank you so much for being here. My question to you is similar. In Mongolia, what are the main challenges that you face at the moment when it comes to political integrity data sets, and what are your immediate plans to work to promote more transparency?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, John, for the very kind introductions. And of course, I'd like to thank again the audience here who have, as Rukshana, my good old friend and colleague, said, made it to the grand finale. And especially Dilia, our chair of the TI, who kept a promise to come and be present here. So without further ado, so I think the question is, what you put, John, is really relevant as to the events happening back in my country as of now, So for our last 5 days, I think we enjoyed kind of a welcoming, warm environment, including our co-host, the US government, who have facilitated this 20th anti-corruption conference. But back in my home country, for the past 7 days, it's already into a week, hundreds and thousands of our young people, youth, have been demonstrating at the central square of our capital city, bracing, not just chilling, but kind of a freezing cold of minus 30 to 40 Celsius. And for those of you who are actually based here in the US, I just found out that minus 40 Celsius is exactly corresponds to minus 40 Fahrenheit. Yeah, so you can imagine what kind of challenges the youth have bracing, and actually they are demonstrating this is into 1 week of anti-corruption demonstration. And what they are demanding is about what we are talking in this room, you know. And by the way, happy also International Human Rights Day, you know. Yesterday it was Anti-Corruption Day, and today is Human Rights Day. And what I think, what we are talking when it comes to the, to the practical, to real life, you know, the conditional level, it's how we actually protect and in a way enable implementation of our human right, not just right to information or access to information, but right to also open data, right to our basic right to be free from corruption. And that's what about Mongolian youth demonstrating about a coal scam, embezzlement of the coal export to the People's Republic of China. You know, so it's not just the Mongolia's issue; it also has also kind of a transboundary implications to our one of the to our neighbors. You know, we are sandwiched between the Russia and China, so you can imagine also. The geopolitical, implications of these demonstrations. So, so what are the challenges? So, back to the political integrity. What our youth are demanding is, first of all, a full disclosure of politicians and politically exposed persons who are behind, who benefited from this coal scam, you know, embezzlement of the public money. So it's exactly also about the beneficial ownership, you know, and beneficial ownership of behind. I think in one of the earliest sessions at this conference, we talked about need to also expand the scope of the beneficial ownership also to the state-owned enterprises, you know, because behind state-owned enterprises, especially mining companies, it's always politicians and politically exposed persons who are ultimately benefiting from the corrupt practices. Second, they are demanding full disclosure of the public expenditure during the past 3 years of the COVID emergency, you know, when we have been in place still actually Mongolia is until end of the year, and the COVID emergency law, which in a way curtails the disclosure of some public information, including the public budget expenditures, you know. And there have been, TI Mongolia has been actually the only actual organization which have whistleblowed against corrupt practices, especially in the health expenditure during the COVID years. And we managed to get some prosecution and investigation, you know, into the corrupt practices. But now I think the youth are into more kind of, they're going beyond, you know, this. And third, I think how it relates to the challenges about, I think, the what we talk about the advancing the open data, the open government partnership for advancing the anti-corruption reforms. I think that's a key point is exactly the political integrity, you know, because it has taken actually for us 20 years to get at this stage of what we have with the asset and income declaration. For the past 10 years, we have been working on the political finance law, and it's only now getting into really, you know, into shape, you know. We managed to get constitutional amendments in 2019, which requires full disclosure of political parties with their income and expenditure reports to the public. And third, we are just starting about also, we realized that without actually the disclosure of the also political lobbying, it's actually impossible to get also the full disclosure of political financing, but also the beneficial ownership. So that's, I mean, I've landed here, yes. Take a break, thank you.
Thanks so much, Tur-Od, for also bringing it back to the actuality of what's happening now in Mongolia. And, you know, we talk about data and we talk about standards and so on, and we should never lose sight that this ultimately connects to, you know, real lives, real people, the situation on the ground. And as Sandra was saying earlier, to defending democracy. So. And
John, let me add a footnote. Actually, we brought with us here our Minister of Justice and Home Affairs and Chief and Deputy Chief Commissioner of our Anti-Corruption Agency. So they had actually to leave on the first day of the conference to deal with the situation back then. And they have already opened more than 20 cases with more than 60 people under investigation, you know, like from customs to border inspectors. And what the youth actually demanding is also investigation into the politicians behind it, yeah? Thank you.
Thanks, Tur-Od. So we've talked a little bit about the how we measure the data, the existence of the data. We've talked about the global overview of how much of this information is out there and what the situation looks like in these three countries. I'd like to know a little bit about specifically the role of civil society in pushing for making this data available when the government is not stepping up and it's not doing its job. And I think one of these really great examples that we have is, you know, everyone here thinks of Prozoro, which is a fantastic case and a fantastic platform. But many years before Prozoro, there was Cuentas Claras on a different topic, not on procurement, on political finance. It shares the similarity that it was a tool built by a civil society organization, Transparencia for Colombia, which was then taken and adapted as the official tool used by the government of Colombia. So can you tell us a little bit about how the process went, what was the key to your success there and what you've learned from doing that?
Yes. Well, as you mentioned, Cuentas Claras, we originally developed it as a Excel spreadsheet. And then over and over, we kind of put more technology into it. But what I'll say is that it's been like a great coincidence, or the alignment of stars between civil society organizations, international cooperation, and electoral authority and political parties. How has this been able to advance? I think it's because all of us, we have been able to see the benefits of working together and publishing this information. For political organizations, for example, there's a very important incentive is that if they don't report, they will not receive the funds that they need for their yearly functioning. So as much as we can help them with that, as much as we can make it easy for them, they will say, okay, I'm here, I will publish the information. For civil society, it's a tool, as you were mentioning, like the red blood cells for transparency, because this information is crucial for us to define advocacy initiatives, to generate reports, to raise awareness, to increase understanding of how money, at least formal money, is flowing during the electoral processes. All this information is very important, so for us it was very relevant, and we have been able also to work with the other actors, for example, public journalists, explaining to them what is this information about, what is it when they are reporting the incomes, because it's itemized with some data and some code. So when you have this 101 is private funds, and then 102 is companies, and all these things, we have been working with them and also like making them realize that it's important. And for the electoral authority, I think there has been two things. One is, as I mentioned, this constitutional principle that information about campaign financing and political financing must be public. So how they were going to make this something concrete. So Cuentas Claras came and helped them with that. And over has been useful information to gather for processes regarding exceeding maximum expenditure allowed or other information. So I'll say it's been more like of like alignment of interests. I'll say on the other hand, one thing that worries us always is that although it's the formal channel for the reporting of incomes and expenses, it's not mandatory by law. I mean, it's the electoral authority that over and over says you have to use this channel. And we have been pressing, like, just mention it by law, and let's not do this every 4 years. But it's an ongoing thing. That's what I was mentioning. We cannot like say, okay, now it's published, so let's move to something else. It's like, no, we still have to go there and continue doing this with the electoral authorities, with the political parties, well, everybody. So that's one thing that we also would love to see. That is, que cuentas claras, it's mandatory, but in law.
Thank you so much, Sandra. And the next question I have for both our chapter colleagues, but also for everyone else in the audience. So we'll try to conclude with these two remarks and then throw it back to you. The question is, what models of CSO cooperation with oversight agencies, with the government, are you aware of, similar to the OGP? OGP is obviously the most famous one and one of the most effective formalized modes of cooperation between civil society and government because of the multi-stakeholder forum, because of this need and commitment to co-create national action plans and commitments. But how do you do this in Lithuania, perhaps even outside of the OGP process? Are there any interesting modes of partnership or cooperation in which you as civil society organizations are having a real, whether formal or semi-formal role in pushing for this reform agenda on data transparency, but also on the oversight? Then I'll go to Tur-Od with the same question, and then I'd like to hear from anyone of you if you have any reflections of a good example where your civil society organization or your government has cooperated well in pushing for this transparency agenda. So, Sergejus, we start with you.
Great. So I was thinking, I gave you a lot of data and a lot of numbers, and now I'd like to share two stories, because I think essentially, if we need to define our work, I think we're in the business of breaking taboos, right? So when I was sharing this data on political integrity, it was all new. Just 4, 5, 6 years ago, we're all PG-13 here, right? A conversation on lobbying in Lithuania was similar to a conversation about sex in the Soviet Union. It didn't exist. Basically, it was impossible to have a meaningful conversation about who meets whom because nobody met anybody, right? So then what do you do about it? How do you start the process of having a conversation? Well, you go to the parliamentary website and you start doing something which you would have never imagined yourself doing, and that is going over parliamentary agendas and basically putting it all together. And that is a rudimentary way to get access to data, and yet is an example of how we often would get our hands on new insights. So this and FOIA requests is part and parcel of our work, and is a very meaningful relationship we have with institutions because we see it as a relationship. I think we're probably the most frequently FOIA filing non-governmental organization in Lithuania. And we take great pride and joy in that. And that is something which we do on a regular basis. Now, we also scrape a lot of data, right? So when it comes to such institutions as the parliament, the ministries, municipalities, we obviously have to decide whether this is something which we can do without an agreement and partnership of sorts, or whether we need to make sure that they're aware of that, because it's easy to spot a bot and then not let you do what you want to do. So we are not pirate-like in that sense. We speak and we usually have that access. They understand that, well, it makes sense, it's a win-win, and we scrape the data and we make sense of it. And of course, the last thing that we always go for is prompting institutions to start publishing that data themselves in a meaningful way. It's a much more complex and much more cumbersome conversation. It never is a single conversation you can have, because you do need to have not the threat is a wrong word, but a possibility to scrape the data, for data, if they don't do it themselves. But it's a balancing act. It's like you juggle those balls in the air, and they understand that inevitably, I think they understand this inevitability of it in a way. And if they are insightful politicians and public servants, they go along. But it is important to have an array of tools at your disposal. And I can give you one more example of this, just to continue with our discussion in a joint manner. About 6 years ago, a conversation on publicity funding So the money that the public sector uses to tell how well or not they've been performing with taxpayers' money was absent from the Lithuanian public narrative. And I use that as an example because I understand that this is an issue in a lot of democracies. It's very difficult to understand how much money your government's been spending on something which kind of makes sense because they should inform the public, right, about what they do. But how to know that they don't abuse that money come an election cycle, come municipal elections, national elections, presidential elections, and do not overly advertise themselves or do not censor the media, or that media does not self-censor when that money is being transferred to it. So we had no data as to how much money that really is when it comes to publicity campaigns. Well, now we know it's 34 million per year, and for a country like Lithuania with the budget of about 50 billion of euros per year, there is a significant amount of money, especially when it comes to media outlets, because it's the media outlets that get that money by and large. Public relations firms as well, but these are the two main groups. So for us to start that conversation, we first did a couple of baseline studies just to understand where we are, which questions we have to ask. Then what we also did, we filed for information from ministries and municipalities. We got that meta level, well, not meta level, macro and meso level data. Next time around, we filed for more detailed reports and actually made sure that we are the ones who have that data online in a public manner in a separate platform. So people can go and actually break it down and see who's been spending money on what and where the money would actually go. It's a cumbersome process. It's a very uncomfortable conversation because actually it's an overly detailed narrative for a lot of people to follow outside of your target groups. However, it is an important conversation because then what happens is that you can always simplify it and you can always make sure that you rank and rate and you explain who is more transparent, who is less transparent. Again, you can go in with very concrete guidelines and suggestions to every single ministry or municipality, and of course you would also prompt them to publish that data proactively whenever they can, both of their websites in separate reports, and to the chief public procurement office that we have in the country that supervises public procurement. So this is a story, again, of data being useful in terms of advocacy narratives, in terms of advocacy goals, and in terms of the fact that you don't need to go for all of the data right away, and it's okay if you pace yourself, because if you have too much data at your disposal or you set the goals too high, even if you achieve all of the goals, most likely that would not be appreciated by the public because it's just not ready to take it on. And you have to remember that by doing the work that you do on data, you educate them as well. And as you do, more opportunities come along, and that you can build on. So perhaps that is the silver lining of our work and sort of kind of partnerships that we engage in terms of our work with the public sector and politics.
Thanks a lot, Sergejus. I definitely see a sort of like step-by-step approach emerging from what Sandra was describing, from what you're describing. Maybe one concrete outcome of this workshop can be we can put our heads together and come up with a step-by-step guide of how civil society can do this. And you know, maybe there'll be a concrete thing. Tur-Od, very briefly, please.
Little thing. Just I'm sorry, thank you. It's a step-by-step process. I think for us it's kind of knowing what we want at the end, and it's as maximum transparency and information that is available, but we know that all of it at the same time won't be useful. It might be even be harmful. But the other thing is to be creative. Is not to go against the law, but kind of find the gaps or the opportunities in the law to advance in the creation of channels and the detailing the information and including other information. So for example, as I was mentioning, we have to report incomes in some like itemized reports, but this was a very compact information. We didn't have really the detail, for example, how much money you're receiving from your own funds or your family funds. So without it going against the law, we say, hey, why don't we include an annex, and then the candidates have to detail a little bit this information. And over and over and over, we continue adding annexes, and now we can know this information detail. And one little, in terms of funds for increasing and supporting women's participation, there was no mandatory reporting itemizing that information, but there was nothing saying you can't report that. So we went all the other way around, like this is important and all this. I mean, we took other legal and political frame to say you have to start reporting this, and then we started including it in Cuentas Claras.
Thanks a lot.
I just asked Tur-Od, and he said it's all right.
I'm sorry.
So no, because like you're being very patient. Just one little thing which will stir the discussion, I think. I looked at you and I forgot. Didn't forget. So I think it's key to be aware that you need to pace yourself as an organization. Because if you don't pace yourself, it will be very difficult for you to actually be there in and out every single day. And this is something which I thought is essential, because you need to be there, you know, in a year. You need to publish reports on a regular basis, because if you do, that will create the anticipation and the incentives for your counterparts to continuously get better. So you incentivize that kind of session. That's it.
That's very, very practical insights. Tur-Od, very briefly, please, so we go back to the audience. Yes.
The bottom, I think, again, I think for me it's a back to basics, you know. I mean, if you take a larger picture, you know, not just as we as experts or practitioners, but also I think the common people in the streets, they have to face with three challenges, you know. It's either the lack of the data or information, or a lack of, let's say, open data, or lack of the kind of ability or capacity, not just the availability of the data or information, you know. And I think that's where I think the complementarity of the global data barometer as a kind of a substantive content comes with the usage of the OGP, Open Government Partnership, you know, because they have the beauty of the OGP is that they have two beautiful tools called National Action Plan Co-Creation, and as you, some of you may know, it's a multi-stakeholder process, so they have to, governments together with the civil society and also with the private sector and other kind of stakeholders, they have to co-create a kind of actions in a way to advance open government, but I think specifically the anti-corruption reforms. And second, what they call an IRM, independent reporting mechanism, where they employ a kind of an independent tool or mechanism to monitor and assess the implementation of this action plans. So using and I think my last sentence, yeah, I think back to the kind of a story, you know. I think it was 10 years back we learned at the TI that our Latin American colleagues have had this tool called CRINUS, ray of light, you know, to assess the transparency of political financing, you know. And we as a TI national chapter actually requested and formed a coalition or alliance with other, let's say, like-minded civil society organizations, and did the assessment of the, you know, that time political parties financing. And what was the outcome was, immediate outcome was a kind of a MOU with the parliamentary parties to disclose their financing. But I think ultimate result was the constitutional amendments which came about 2 years back, you know, which now constitutionally mandates not just the parliamentary parties, but all political parties to disclose and to uphold also, not just to disclose the financing, but also uphold the political integrity. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tur-Od, for sharing that other very interesting model of moving things forward. So questions, remarks, comments, thoughts? Okay, we can start here. Yeah, okay, we can start. Yeah. We'll collect two at a time, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Rinaldo and Transparency International Romania. I have two questions. One, it's related to the quality of data. We totally agree that we need data, but then if data are not good, we cannot work with them. And the very specific question, it's about verification mechanisms for the quality of data. I will put it in a very brief context. In Romania, we cooperate very well at this moment with the National Integrity Agency. The National Integrity Agency in Romania is the agency that actually centralized assets declarations and makes verifications on this for conflicts of interest and unjustified wealth and assets. Until this moment, we don't have open data access to the assets declaration, but this is somehow in a project to be developed, and we are very confident that we will have that. The agency itself plans to use the database with some red flags in order to identify risks in declarations, in order to do further verifications. And this is great. But I think that this may also incentivize a bit the people that are filing the declarations, the ones that are declaring, actually to lie in the declaration in order to avoid to be in the risk red flag situation. So how do we can verify the data in order to avoid that people are lying when putting data forward? And related to that, the other question is, if there are situations, or did you analyze beneficial ownership in assets declaration? Because if we speak about legal ownership, this is important, but actually people do hide their assets. So beneficial ownership would be extremely important.
Anyone in particular you want your questions answered by?
Well, the question on verification, it's for everybody. The question on beneficial ownership is for the people that actually looked into many sets of data, and if we have any kind of good practices there, it will be great. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take one question.
Hi, my name is Alex Aparicio. I'm from the Center for International Private Enterprise. Sandra, I can't really see you because of this pillar, but this question is for you. I kind of, yeah. My question goes to the Colombian context. So obviously Petro came in on a platform of anti-corruption, and just wondering how, if you've been able to use tools such as this to kind of make the rhetoric kind of line up with action, and if so, how? Thank you.
We can actually take Russia as well.
Hi, thanks. So I have actually one comment as a question on how to improve cooperation, and then a question to Silvana. So as to how to create a better platforms for improving the content of data. I think one thing that we are doing at OSCE, sorry I didn't introduce myself, OSCE, Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, we tend to think that we being as a platform for dialogue with as intergovernmental organization, but bringing in TI chapters, we think we modestly and shyly tried this year to bring in also some of the governmental institutions, but also decision makers, MPs. And I think all three sides had to learn something from each other, including that all three can help each other advocate for better legal framework, but also often for better conditions for oversight agencies to be able to produce better data. So I think this is something that at least I took away from our November session. So this could be a good modus operandi for other regional organizations in other parts of the world, as OSCE is not a global one. And question for Silvana. I was just thinking about, do you have and do you find it relevant when you are looking into data and the quality about the timing of certain particular data being published? And here, for example, I just think of like the campaign finance data. We know that there are preliminary reports and final reports, and usually these final reports are the only ones that are really detailed, but they come very late when all electorate. And this I actually ask more in the terms not only about combating corruption, but another thing, as Tur-Od mentioned, it's a Human Rights Day, and we speak about informed choice, and how much the timing of data published in campaign finance reports prior to election would help electorate to make more informed choice. And then linked to that, if you would think of any other specific timings for some specific data that would be helpful when you are measuring, because not always it's the same as, like, there is data like when it is published. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Then maybe we start, Silvana, if you want to take. Okay, then we won't do another round, but go for it.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm Gaurav Godwani from Civic Data Lab India. So as you people might know, India is not one of the OGP countries. So there's a lot of open data produced, but some of this open data is led by civil society organizations. These open data platforms are developed by scraping information on a near real-time basis and publishing that high quality data set for everyone to use. How that could be better represented in global data parameter, and how we can make the whole building of global data parameter much more consultative process where more civil societies, social enterprises can participate in contributing the data sets which they have.
Great, thanks a lot. And maybe we'll start with.
First of all, thank you for the questions. In terms of the time where the data is reported, so far what we're asking all the, not only the public finance data, but all the data sets, it's about if they are updated regularly, if they are published, with the due process. We are not asking particular timeline regarding reports on financial data, but probably some of the things that we might need to rethink during 2023. So probably that's something that we need to think about together with, you were discussing about also the mechanisms about taking, for example, civil society, TI chapters in particular, government officials and so on to have better processes. And in that sense, probably that's something that we need to strengthen as well, because we have the government survey, we have the national researchers and the regional hubs, but probably we need to strengthen that collaboration and probably work on that as well. I know the question was not for me, but I'm taking that comment because I think it's really important. And it goes hand in hand with the other comment about civil society platform. One of the things that we are asking when we are asking about a particular data set, if it's available online, that's the first question. Then if it's available because of government actions. And then, you can add there if it's available, for example, because a civil society organization or a social enterprise is publishing that data. Of course, the score is completely different because we are measuring what governments are doing, but we want to also highlight the efforts and the uses that civil society is doing in terms of not only publishing data that probably is not available because of government efforts, as the indicator mentions, but also when they are doing, for example, visualization tools or other type of tools. We also want to know that. And in that sense, even though it's not part of the scoring, it is part of the data that is available in the website. And probably we want to keep working on that and highlighting more about the uses, because it's one of the things that is more difficult to measure, uses about the data. So that's something to be improved in the future. For example, the things that you mentioned. But thank you for your comments.
Thanks. Maybe we'll do Sandra on the new government.
Thank you. I don't see you. I'm sorry. Okay. So regarding the new government, indeed, he had a lot of anti-corruption initiatives while he was doing campaign. Now that he's in power, we are not seeing a clear path of how he's gonna advance in anti-corruption. He's taken it, or what we're seeing is in a more classical way of reporting information, governability, and all this, but we're saying, yeah, you have to see it in a systematic way. You have to see what corruption has to do with drug traffic, with criminal, environmental crimes, and all this. But there they are not yet. And then in these things, I'll have to say that those that have been promoting and very advocating in Congress about taking back all these advances that we have in terms of publishing information of political financing are the parties in government. And I don't think they have a bad intention, really no, and I think we have to give them the time to prove that they want to do things right. But I think they don't really understand the full scope of this. So what they're saying is, because campaign financing is the mother and the root of all our problems, let's just have 100% state funding. We here all know what happens to these countries that go there and then they go backwards, and then what is gonna happen is that all the illicit money will go under the table and it's gonna be even harder. So those are the kind of things that we're like, you're not being too concrete now that you're in power of what you want to do and advance in terms of anti-corruption. And if I can say one little thing about verification, we in Transparencia do generate periodical reports, but what we do is all the time we double check the information that is being presented in these public sites about procurement, about campaign financing, about everything. So we do a scrapping, as you were mentioning. We cross data with other information, IDs, numbers, other information that is public, we try to cross it and be able to verify. If we're gonna come out and say 3 things, we try to be as clear and concrete and trust that what we are saying is right.
Thanks a lot, Sandra. Could we have then on the verification and BO question, first Renzo and then Sergejus?
Sure. Thanks for the question. So just some concrete numbers from our report. We found that 3/4 of OGP countries require collection of beneficial ownership data, yet only half of them actually empower an agency to collect timely and accurate information. And only 1/3 actually have any sort of verification process for processing that data. That doesn't go to the quality of the verification process, just whether it's actually on the books. So clearly a huge issue, and one of the things that we mentioned in the report, and I've mentioned here, is the linking, right? You've mentioned it yourself with asset disclosure. But again, we find that only 4% of OGP countries have published common identifiers. They're beneficial ownership data sets that can be used with any of the other data sets that we've been discussing here. And so we have seen some innovation from OGP countries, commitments to actually link, for example, in the procurement process to make sure that only companies that have declared their beneficial owners can receive public contracts. So that kind of linking across data sets we see is we're not even close to where we need to be, but clearly that's part of the solution to the verification. Thanks.
So what Renzo said, completely agree. I'll approach it from the civil society's angle, because the quality of data and the verification process is actually always on our mind. It's central to our thought process. And when you deal with politics and political integrity, that becomes your priority because you know you will get those questions. So we are always prepared to react and have this question and mistakes on our hand. Now, the conundrum and the psychedelic sort of side of it is that most of the time these are not your mistakes, but these are the mistakes because of the poor quality of primary data that you deal with. So for us, it has been key to make sure we guide this narrative in a very correct manner, always reacting, always pointing out. Because, you know, for instance, 1 out of 8, just to put more context into my public policy, my publicity sort of funds narrative, 1 out of 8 media outlets in Lithuania is owned or tied to a politician. When it comes to our 15 ministries, 8% of their funding, publicity funding, goes to just 12 companies tied to politicians. And we broke, for instance, another taboo when everybody thought it's the municipalities and local level politicians that would actually spend more money on sort of would give more money to companies tied to political parties. No, it's the other way around, right? So you get questions right away. And you need to be able to answer, you need to be able to showcase and put people in touch if they make mistakes, right? Because it is also your reputation on the line. And you have to be very conscious of the fact that there are double checks and triple checks that you need to run if you see political ties, because these are particularly the ones that will get a lot of public attention. So that's what we do, and I think if you set aside enough resources and time to double check and you do not rush, then at least from the managerial, tactical point of view, you can alleviate the risks of ending up in a mess. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much, Sergejus, for closing on that very interesting remark. I would like to thank the panel. Thank you for introducing us to the tool. I hope you all will look at the GDB data and the OGP Explorer. Thank you very much to the chapter colleagues who shared very practical insights. I think this idea of maybe a practical step-by-step guide on how to open up data from civil society can be a very needed sort of immediate intervention when governments are not doing it. And, thank you very much to all of you.